Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rudy Torres, and I'm an intern at the Reagan Ranch Center in Santa Barbara. Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce a bold voice in the conservative movement, Alex Marlow. Alex is the editor-in-chief of Breitbart News Network. He is also the author of Breaking the Law, Exposing the Weaponization of America's Legal System Against Donald Trump, which also comes out today, and individual members of YAF can get a copy. Yeah. Alex has been on the cover of Time and Newsweek, named in Forbes 30 Under 30, and called perhaps the most significant media figure in America. Fun fact, Alex is also a YAF alum. Alex was an incredibly effective student activist at UC Berkeley, brilliantly exposing the leftist hypocrisy at his campus. He met Andrew Breitbart during a college YAF retreat at the Reagan Ranch Center and went on to become the very first employee of Breitbart News. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming the leader in conservative media, Alex Marlow.
Good afternoon, everyone. At his best, man is the noblest of all animals. Separated from law and justice, he is the worst. It's a quote from Aristotle, smart guy. Thought about that quote a lot this past year because I've been spending the time looking into what I believe is one of the most widespread and frightening issues of corruption in the history of this republic, into the lawfare against Donald Trump and his supporters. It's a saga that's ongoing, and I regard it as the greatest threat in many ways to the conservative movement as we know it. You guys may have heard Trump say in the past, they want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom. They want to silence me because I'll never let them silence you. In the end, they're not after me, they're after you, and I just happen to be standing in their way. It's a good quote, right? And it's accurate. The statement's fundamentally true. Trump is hardly their only target, he's merely the most powerful. And if America is going to endure, we must acknowledge that Trump's words aren't merely political rhetoric, but a solemn warning. We must defeat the lawfare and those who have used it to accumulate power for the political left or lose the country. Stakes are that high, and the lawfare is now the new normal. Now is the time to understand what's happening and to prepare ourselves for the legal battles that are yet to come. But first, I want to talk about how we got here. It was nice enough of YAF to invite me today, of all days, because today is the day that my third book is released. It's called Breaking the Law. And the book is my first two books, Breaking the News and Breaking Biden. Also, YAF was great to promote and give me a chance to speak at various events about them and about my investigations and my investigative research. What I did is I looked into the ongoing lawfare, not just against Trump, but against his supporters, and then away the lawfare superstructure, the very well-funded and massive, widespread, made of thousands of people, very powerful, very influential, are continuing to use our legal system to weaponize it, to gain political advantage in this country. They continue to do this with these judges who are all over the country who are blocking parts of the executive branch. I think it's one of the greatest scandals of the century that I'll get into in a second about how the lawfare superstructure attempted to rig the 2024 election. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about my story, because my story is actually very similar to many of yours. I started as a YAF student. That was my entree into the conservative media. And I used my connections to YAF to get a job with a man named Andrew Breitbart. How many of you are familiar with Andrew? Andrew was the pioneer of conservative new media. He was a web journalist extraordinaire, the pioneer of conservative media, and we're all heirs to his legacy, and we did continue to use parts of his playbook. What Andrew sought to do is usurp the establishment media with citizen journalists to fight against all the political power that the left had, not just from a political angle, but from a cultural angle. Andrew taught us how to be fighters, how to step out of the shadows, how to hold our ground in the face of adversity, how to never apologize. And you're only taking flack if you're over the target. These are all things that we understand as fundamentally necessary in our modern conservative movement, but no one really knew these things when Andrew started talking about them 15, 20 years ago. But he also taught us something which is really amazing, which is also happening in a big way, and you guys are part of this as well. He taught us that the best way to win is actually to have fun, to try to make this a movement with joy, with jokes, with memes, with attitude. And he took that mentality to his approach to the way he reported stories. It was very infectious. He would have wanted a movement that had a lot less Joe Biden in it, spacing out in his basement, and a lot more Donald Trump. It would have been a movement where he would have said that the left, if they're going to start elevating joyless scolds like Rosie O'Donnell, what we should do is we should try to co-opt Sydney Sweeney and make her ours. That was kind of an unbelievable thing. The left did that. Andrew would have absolutely loved that news cycle. Can you believe the Democrats are paying consultants $20 million to try to figure out why young men don't want to vote Democrat anymore? And then the first thing they do is they're like, hey, look, that's a hot chick in jeans. Let's call her a Nazi. What? How could we have ever been this lucky? And Andrew would have seen this and thought that we finally won. His vision for conservative movement had happened. He would have loved to see the day where the left are actually the prude scolds and we're the ones having fun with the hottest chicks. That would have been his vision for us. And I think it's truly important that we're seeing people throughout the movement, not just people at the younger people, the grassroots, but everyone rise up and to say, you know what, we're going to have joy, we're going to have fun, but we're also going to fight. We're not going to back down. We're not going to apologize. We're not going to try to curry favor with the establishment because they're losers and they've gotten everything wrong. So Andrew won me over with that message that the culture is upstream of politics, that we need to start with the culture wars and then the politics will sort itself out. You all basically fundamentally understand that point. But again, when I started with Andrew, when I started YAF, no one was saying these points. No one was making these points at all. And we all accept this to be true. But when Andrew was preaching it, he was alone. He was a revolutionary. And we carry out his vision at his namesake website, Breitbart.com, every day. I hope all of you can check it out and get your news from there. I know a lot of you do because we're incredibly dominant across the social web, but we're the biggest conservative outlet on all of social media, aside from maybe Fox, but I think they have 100 times my budget. So if anyone wants to invest, we're open for business. But we are starting to understand how to vanquish the left. And it's not just doing it with politics, it's also doing it with entertainment and with the media. Okay, great. So think about how how movies used to dominate our culture, and the left would use them to inject their wokeness, inject their politics into the bloodstream, into the ecosystem, into what we discussed. Well, how are movies doing these days? Well, they're a lot less woke than they used to be, and no one's seeing them anyway. That's a win. How about the media? Jeff Bezos himself, founder of Amazon, owns the Washington Post, wrote in 2024 in an op-ed that his own paper lacks credibility. He noted in his piece, the same piece, that the journalism profession is the least trusted profession. That's a major win for the conservative movement. We spent a lot of decades trying to prove that fact, and now people believe it. At the same time, a lot of people gathering their news online. We've got a huge advantage there because if you think about it, can the left meme? Left can't meme. They're not funny. They have no joy. All they have is anger. All they have is animosity. So we're beating them in that front as well. So the establishment media is a disgrace. We know that. We want it discredited. I wrote a book about that called Breaking the News. But that's not the end of the battle. And Andrew is not here today to be with us and to see what we're going through now. But the reality that he envisioned is becoming true, but the left is not lazy. They're smart. And we can't underestimate their ability to find new battlefronts. And they're doing that right now. They're developing new tactics to try to defeat us. And their most effective tactic over the last several years was not just media manipulation, we neutralized that. It's not Hollywood, we neutralized that. It's the lawfare. So my definition of lawfare, it's got two parts to it. The use of the legal system against political and cultural adversaries and the weaponization of the legal system for partisan political purposes. So basically destroy people or get concepts out there that you want culturally. And it's traditionally come from the left. I'll give you a brief history of it. It really started from my research back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He wanted to add justices to the Supreme Court so that he would essentially be in control of two executive branches that could do different parts of his agenda. That was his goal. He wanted generational control over the judiciary. And it was that complex that I think really started to reset the way we think of the law in this country. He wanted a system of living law. So that's the opposite when you guys hear about originalism. He wanted a concept that the law is progressive and reinterpreting its meaning in the left's political image and the left's political agenda. You could reinterpret the law in that way. That gave rise to Earl Warren, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in the mid-50s through the late 60s, widely regarded as the most liberal court in history. And that court marked the beginning of the end of judicial restraint. This is where you start hearing about the concept of judicial activism, which you guys, I'm sure, have heard about at this point. And the biggest example of that, Roe versus Wade, where they took the most hot-button political issue of the time. They took it out of the public debate completely, and they treated it like it was a civil right. All of a sudden, the right to terminate human life in the womb wasn't something we discussed. It wasn't for people to decide with their families and God even. It was something that the government declared was a civil right, and you could not infringe upon it. And this led to, of course, a massive genocide of nascent life in America. Our views, culturally, politically, the way we felt about abortion actually didn't change, according to the polls. But what did change was the quantity of abortions that took place. And it was all because of lawfare activist judges. So that's the DNA of the left. That's where it comes from. And then conservatives started fighting back, slowly, methodically, winning elections, doing things in order for the Reagan Revolution to take place, deep connections to YAF, which does an incredible stewardship of Reagan's legacy. The Reagan Revolution was incredibly important because that solidified the Supreme Court as a conservative court. Again, gave us an opportunity, gave us a chance to have a stay from the lawfare. But then entered a man who I regard as the godfather of modern lawfare, someone who was formerly president, sort of. We're not sure anymore. Joe Biden. Joe Biden, allegedly, I think he was still cognizant by then, but who knows? I mean, was he ever all there? Come on. But in 1987, he came up with a tactic that became colloquially known as borking. Joe Biden was a famously terrible law student. He finished near dead last in his class, and he almost got kicked out for plagiarizing 5 pages of a lawfare paper. He would have been removed, aside from he ended up writing a groveling apology that was many pages long. I reviewed all this in my Biden research. It's pretty surreal in that he actually survived and graduated law school. So a terrible law student, never really practiced law because he got into politics right away. He was actually in politics, people don't know this, for over 100 years in America. He's the first American politician to serve for over 100 years. So a famously horrible law student. And this giant Robert Bork comes in, he's nominated to the Supreme Court, and Biden shuts it down. Why did he shut it down? He knew Bork was a lock when Bork was nominated. But what ended up happening is the left-wing movement, their activists got to Biden and said, you got to stop this. You got to shut this guy down. He's too good. He's too conservative. We got to shut him down. And it worked. That was the borking. And all of a sudden now lawfare is back on track for the left. They try it again with what Clarence Thomas referred to as the high-tech lynching. And who led that yet again? Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy. That one failed, thank God, because Clarence Thomas has become one of the standard bearers for the U.S. Constitution, one of the best minds that we have, period. Continues to weather decades of attacks. They go on to this day, and I detail some of the fresh ones in the book. But we survived that, but it has just put the leftist mindset on overdrive that we can use the legal system to try to gain politically. Next, Barack Obama and Eric Holder, they greatly accelerate the lawfare. They actually use tactics from the global war on terror against their political opponents. And this ushered in a huge new age. They had this clandestine project called Operation Choke Point, with the goal of choking off industries that were unfavorable to Democrats. They used the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control to blacklist financiers for international terrorism. They used these same tactics to try to blacklist conservative activist groups, to get them debanked, to get them more scrutinized by the government, to slow roll their ability to get approval so that they could have nonprofits. And then that takes us to the first Trump era, where the lawfare machine is in place. And all of a sudden, you start seeing Trump-connected entities being jailed partially because of their connection to Trump. Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, Paul Manafort come to mind. Next come Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro. All these people served in jail for political purposes. We kind of blow through this stuff. We had real political prisoners in this country in our time. And then the left saw their golden opportunity with January the 6th. Now, not our best day ever. It wasn't our best day. But what they said, it was an insurrection. Well, there's an insurrection that's supposed to be a violent overthrow of the government. There was one shot fired that day. It was by a police officer at Trump supporter Ashley Babbitt, and she died. They were so desperate to talk about guns that, remember Cassidy Hutchinson, one of the whistleblowers or whatever? She said that she heard people talking about guns. That's all they had. Like, they heard people talking about it. And remember, she also said that Trump tried to commandeer one of the military vehicles, the Beast, and she was going to drive himself to the Capitol to participate. And this was talked about in our Congress as if it was serious stuff. It's just, this would have been, if a Hollywood's writer's room, if you'd pitched these ideas, they would have said, get out of town, these are stupid. But yet this was taking place in our Congress, and all of it was designed to stifle the Trump agenda and make it so that he could not govern and that he could not be president yet again. Trump actually offered, by the way, National Guardsmen to come to the Capitol, and Nancy Pelosi turned him down and later said, I take responsibility for that. So if that really was an insurrection, it was clearly the lamest insurrection in the history of the world because Congress was back in session a few hours later. So one of those things that in the meantime, you've got elements of the American legal system, people like Christopher Wray at the FBI, who's investigating conservative and religious groups. He's investigating Catholic congregations. The real scandals are taking place way behind the scenes, and yet we're fixated on just overblown hysteria over a bunch of people who mostly were just wandering around the Capitol because they were pissed off about the election. Treated it like it was the worst thing ever. But that made it so it was game on for the lawfare superstructure. They saw their chance to try to go and cancel Trump for life, to try to make sure that he was blocked from being the president. The centerpiece of breaking the law is I did an investigation of all 6 of the major cases against President Trump. And I'll go through some details with you here, but here is the main point. Every one of these major cases was directly connected to Joe Biden's White House. This is blatantly illegal. It is blatant election interference. And I regard this as the biggest scandal of the 21st century. And if we do not start holding people to account for what I believe will be found to be crimes, then they will just do it again in 2028 and they'll just do it again in 2032 and beyond. People need to be held accountable for what they did, try to subvert our democracy. They're the ones who said, we're the ones who are pro-democracy. They can't stand democracy. And if they could, they would have allowed for the people to go and vote and to choose their own president, not try to select the president on their behalf by trying to jail Donald Trump in the middle of an election and bankrupt them. Let me go through some of these cases and some of the connections to the White House. Of course, all the details you can get from my reporting, but some important things I want to emphasize. The Stormy Daniels case, which was framed as a hush money case. Not hush money. First of all, hush money is not illegal. You can pay someone to not talk. You can pay someone to not spread lies. It's allowed. And I cite examples of the book of Trump paying people who were going to publicly lie about him for stuff that was blatantly not true, but he just didn't want it to be a distraction. So he'd pay them off. That's fine. It's not illegal, and it doesn't even mean guilt. They frame it as that because it sounds sinister. Well, it was led up by these guys, Alvin Bragg, who ran for Manhattan District Attorney on the specific promise of getting Trump. He actually said he sued Trump 100 times before he became DA, which is not true. But that was how he campaigned to get elected, blatantly political. So during this case, that Bragg relied on these novel theories about the law to try to supercharge what would have been a misdemeanor that would have expired into some sort of a felony. And because they really didn't have much, it was the weakest case in the group. But this was the only one that got a criminal conviction. How to get a criminal conviction? Well, first of all, you had a left-wing judge, guy Juan Merchan, who donated to Joe Biden, which is illegal. And his daughter was one of the biggest bundlers of all for the Democrat Party. She'd raised something like $100 million for Democrats. If you want to talk about a conflict of interest, it gets worse. The lead prosecutor on the case, a guy named Matthew Colangelo, he was the number 3 guy in Joe Biden's Justice Department. That's an organization of over 100,000 people. This is the type of job that is a springboard to be FBI director, cabinet secretary, even Supreme Court justices have previously held this position. And so what did he do? He took a demotion all the way down to being a prosecutor in Alvin Bragg's office in Manhattan. This is the same as taking a 4-star general and putting him in the National Guard as a private. This is the equivalent of taking someone out of the Super Bowl and then putting them in the Pee Wee football game as the backup punter. That's what they were doing. Why were they doing this? Because this was a guy who was in the White House, in the Joe Biden upper echelons of his Justice Department. And the plot was to take out Trump. That's what this is about. And clearly, the evidence suggests coordinate with the White House while it was happening. All this should be blatantly illegal. The next one, the Fani Willis case. You guys remember Fani Willis in Georgia, who tried to accuse Trump of running some sort of broad criminal conspiracy to rig the election? You might have recalled that she hired her boyfriend onto the case, a guy named Nathan Wade. It's a funny story because they immediately used the new money that they had coming in to take a bunch of trips, Caribbean vacations, wine tasting, going to the Florida Keys, all off of your dime. Any of you who live in Georgia, you're all paying for that stuff. So, but there's something really interesting about Nathan Wade, is that Nathan Wade was a family lawyer. He did divorces. He did prenuptial agreements. This was a RICO case. This was trying to bust the mob. Why was Nathan Wade in a RICO case? No reason for this, ever. It's completely absurd that this would happen. Nathan Wade gets 2 8-hour meetings at the White House during the middle of the case. What would a family lawyer, a guy who does divorces, what would he be doing at the White House? This guy was a nobody. There's no reason, there's no other explanation than to talk about how we're going to get Donald Trump, how we're going to try to rig the election, try to jail Trump. That was the goal. There are 2 Jack Smith cases. Jack Smith, you might recall, now under investigation, which is great news. Jack Smith, his entire appointment was unconstitutional. It's a complicated story, and the Trump legal team was genius for figuring this out. But it's a violation of the appointments clause. Basically, the way he was appointed was illegal from the start. He was basically completely unmoored from any sort of accountability whatsoever. He answered to no one. If you don't know the background on Jack Smith is the type of guy where America is not good enough for him. When Trump won the first time, he left the country. He's actually one of the guys who left when he said, "Wait, we're going to leave if Trump wins," and everyone's lying aside from Rosie. Jack Smith is one of the guys he left. He went to the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and he was trying to prosecute war crimes while he was there. And then he gets summoned back. He actually couldn't start the case right away from America because he got hit by, he was riding his bicycle to work in the Netherlands, and he got hit by a scooter. So we actually had to start, which I just find very poetic, that the guy who's supposed to bust Trump couldn't start the case because he got hit by a scooter while on his bicycle. I think that's very fitting to get the greatest alpha male of all time, the scooter bike injury guy. Appointed by Merrick Garland. So Merrick Garland seems like a nice guy, not free from blame any of this stuff. And 18 months, Jack Smith could harass Trump, leak to the media, try to do everything he could politically to undermine Donald Trump and to make sure that he could not be elected. All of this found out to be unconstitutional, all of it illegitimate. Maybe the most fun but also disturbing case that I go through is the E. Jean Carroll case, which Trump doesn't call her E. Jean Carroll, by the way. It's really amusing when you talk to him. He just says, the woman. I don't know the woman. I don't even know who she is. I just call her the woman. And it's great because she's not worthy of him even speaking her name. She was a writer for Saturday Night Live and a columnist. And Trump said she had a book because it was called like Not His Type, because Trump had a line that she's not Trump's type. I got news for you. She is absolutely not Trump's type. I know Trump fairly well. She's not his type. But she had framed this thing that Trump had raped her, or maybe not. She couldn't decide. She went back and forth. In a Bergdorf Goodman in I guess it was the earlier mid-90s. She couldn't quite remember when. But I do know it was after Law and Order had released an episode with the plot of a powerful man raping someone in Bergdorf Goodman. We do know that happened after the fact. So this person, in her narrative, is someone who is constantly changing her story, sometimes even in the same interview, and is someone who's written about sex at Bergdorf Goodman in her columns in the past. And her story almost mirrors a Law and Order episode. She was asked about this. And she said she was unaware of the episode, even though she is a Law & Order fan, because that episode was in the franchise Law & Order SVU, Special Victims Unit. So she's not an SVU fan, so she wasn't actually aware of the story that almost mirrored exactly what she was telling people about Trump. So Trump, who had, of all the accusations against him, there's no other accusations of rape out there. And there's this one from this bizarre woman who's not his type, who is basically appears of the exact same story as the plot of a TV show. And this goes on and on and on until there's a judgment of something like $95 million, or actually 2 judgments in all, against Trump. She didn't even ask for that much money. And yet there's judgment because it's a New York judge and New York jury. And that's what they do. When you shop and you find the right jurisdiction for a specific case, then you can get a conviction even if there is just absurd wielding of stories to get to the point where you're there. What's remarkable about this case, though, to me the most, is that it was the idea of George Conway. How many of you are familiar with George Conway? He's a never Trump TV pundit, a guy who's on MSNBC. So he's a guy who's a professional MSNBC guy. He meets her, I guess, at a party and says, oh, you should really sue Trump over this. And it's bankrolled by a guy named Reid Hoffman, who those of you who hang out online enough, you'll see Reid Hoffman's name a lot. He's one of the biggest donors to Democrats, period. So he's a guy who bankrolls all sorts of left-wing activism, and he's the one who made sure that Eugene Carroll had the best attorneys in the game, backing her up for years on end as she sued Trump. In the meantime, he's a regular visitor to the Joe Biden White House. He's meeting with Joe Biden in Silicon Valley. I counted 5 visits to the White House just in 2022 alone during the midst of this whole saga. What do you think he's talking about while he's there? I don't know the answers to this. This is where the investigations need to begin. But we know what it looks like. We know what it looks like. We know that this all looks as though the left is coordinating to try to use the legal system to try to rig our elections and try to subvert democracy. And this is really where the warning comes in to all of you, is that the case that I try to make in Breaking the Law is that a lot of this is very daunting. I go into all the details of all of these district judges, all these people who have been stopping these various parts of Trump's agenda, the conservative movement's agenda during the first 6 months of his administration. What do we do about these things? And I'll tell you, the biggest answer, the one that I can offer the most, is that we need to be vigilant as a movement. We need to play a long game. We need to take the approach that we took in the latter half of the last century, where the way we answered Roe versus Wade was to slowly, methodically build up our movement, to stay involved, to stay engaged, to make sure people are locked in at a civic and political level. It's really the only hope that we have. Because the left is disorganized. They have hundreds of millions of dollars. Tens of millions of people in this country, many of you included, are in a lawless area where you have a district attorney who is bought and paid for by George Soros, who funds 9 figures into campaigns to make sure that chaos agents are running our law and order in our cities. The type of people who want to see more felons back on the street. The type of people who want to make it so it is harder to prosecute. The type of people who thinks the solution to too many people in the jail is just to let them all out of the jail. These are the type of people who want to see America undermined at every turn. I've known this for my entire life. Because I grew up in a strange little place across the country called California. Have you guys heard of it? It's a very strange place. You guys have heard of Alligator Alcatraz? Yeah, it's like the opposite of that. It's like that's what we got. We got all the good guys surrounded by the alligators, and then all the bad guys are just kind of outside laughing at us. California is a place that abandoned law and order when I was a child. It's part of why I think there's a pattern of a lot of your favorite activists probably came from California. Maybe it's Ben Shapiro. Maybe it's one of the great Salem radio hosts like Larry Elder, Dennis Prager. Maybe it's Stephen Miller. You guys like that guy, right? He's pretty good, right? A contemporary of mine in Los Angeles. We watched as law and order was completely abandoned and one of the most iconic parts, not just of the country, but of the world. A place where people aspired. They dreamed of going to LA and being a part of that culture, and we destroyed it. First with illegal immigration, where we broadcast a signal to the entire world that we don't care about our immigration laws. You're allowed to break them. In fact, you're encouraged to break them. And if you do break them, we're going to give you free education. We're going to give you free health care if you do. And in the meantime, all of our test scores went down, cost of living went up, crime went up, and anyone with a brain is sitting there going, oh, this is a terrible idea. Why do we keep doing this? But we kept electing Democrats, and we kept the experiment going. If you want to know why some people have such rhinoceros skin who are so good at taking flack, a lot of us who grew up amidst this insanity in these parts of the country that were just eating ourselves alive, and we were getting called racist for pointing it out, we got very numb to it. And we're able to say all sorts of things now that without feeling any guilt whatsoever, because we know that these people are frauds and they're liars, and they're the ones who are ruining our cities. And the only path back is to restore law and order. And the only way to restore law and order again is to keep all of you engaged. There is a part of our system that needs to be curtailed. The nationwide injunctions that we talk about, judge shopping, there's lots of details in the lawfare that are going to be a big process to fix. We're not going to just be able to magically remove the threat of lawfare all at once. It's not going to be one of those battles. The superstructure's in place. They're working right now to figure out ways to make it so that they have an easier path in future elections in order to win. But the one thing that we can do is that we can identify that the real problem with the American judicial system right now is as simple as this, and it's a big one, but it's a simple one. There's just too many liberals on the bench. There's just too many liberals. And how are we going to defeat them? A strong conservative movement, people like you guys, staying activated in off-election years, in years where you're not thrilled what's happening, in years where maybe you're disappointed that your favorite issue is not being put at the front burner. I had that problem a lot during the first Trump administration. A lot of my favorite stuff, I'm a big immigration guy. That hit the back burner for 3 years. Very difficult when that stuff happens. But the only way we're going to fix this is if we nominate great judges. And how do you nominate great judges? You have a robust, charismatic, deeply engaged conservative movement. The only way to do that is to build the strongest possible movement filled with the most energetic, most fun, most talented people imaginable, the people who are informed, the people who are engaged, and people who are psyched about this country. I've got 4 children. I'm optimistic. You can't afford children unless you're optimistic. I have faith that we're not going to have a President Buttigieg in our lifetime or President Kamala Harris. I got my doubts about Harris. What do you guys think? How's she doing these days? If you just laugh at just everything, all your problems go away. I learned that. The point is their bench is very weak. You guys, everyone wants to talk about Zoran these days. Well, we're living through that out in California. It's already happened. We've already gone through that experiment. The socialism experiment doesn't work. But we got to be the ones that get the word out. We've got to be the ones that share with people that we've got 2 paths forward. We've got the path forward of lawfare, where there are 2 tiers of justice in this country, where the left is able to try to buy elections, to try to sow chaos in our streets, try to subvert our democracy. Or there's the path where you guys stay as engaged as humanly possible and to try to recruit to make sure there's a smart, talented crop of people in our future. That's the way to restore the American dream. I'm Alex Marlow. Thank you for having me today. I think I have time for a couple of questions.
There's some time for a few questions. Please line up next to my colleague Liam. State your name, school, and a brief question.
Hi, my name is Joshua Beckham Kim, and I'm a Korean American studying abroad at Toronto Metropolitan University in Canada. As someone deeply rooted in both Korean and American values, I strongly resonate with your point about how the left is weaponizing your point about how the left is the judicial system through lawfare. I've seen firsthand just how dangerous and oppressive this tactic can be. My question is, how can we effectively fight back against this threat, and what can we do to defend ourselves from being crushed by these politically motivated attacks?
Yeah, so there's a few things. The obvious one, I'll do the biggest one first, which is what I try to close with, which is that it is a long battle, and it's a battle that is only won with a vast movement. I'm not going to say, because I don't want to get YAF in any trouble, this has anything to do with how people vote or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that, just so YAF doesn't get in trouble with their nonprofit status. But it does come down to a broader, civically engaged public that agrees with us on stuff. So that is why it is a battle that is won over time by putting people in position to be able to be standard bearers for the Constitution and for law and order itself. The concept of law and order, the left hates the concept of law and order. Once you understand that, and look at the immigration example, they hate the idea that there are laws in the books that must be followed. They don't like that. They don't like because it encumbers them. It prevents them from doing what they want to do. And once you accept that fact that they really don't like it, they don't like the idea that there are laws that must be enforced, that infringes on their goals of politics above all else. They want to achieve political means by any means necessary. And they can't do that if the law gets in their way. That's not any means necessary. So the only way to beat that is to convince people that they're wrong and to do that over and over again. That's the best place to start. And there's a lot of other things to do once we get there, but numbers. That's the main goal. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless America. God bless our allies.
It is a global problem, too. Brazil's got it even worse than we do, believe it or not, for another day.
Thank you very much for your speech. I greatly appreciated it, and someone who am interested in going to law school myself, I really appreciated the legal focus of this speech. One question that I have for you. Oh, by the way, my name is Michael, and I go to Christendom College.
Great.
One question that I have for you is that Trump has been a cultural phenomenon in himself. Traditionally, Democrat voting populations have turned out in record numbers for Trump. How do you see the future of the Republican Party and conservative politics after this Trump term?
Yeah, I'm optimistic, but it's important to see some of the stuff he did right. His podcast strategy was really genius, where he went on all these podcasts that were sort of culturally focused. That was really good. I think the left is offering nothing for young males in particular, and I don't think they're offering a lot for young females as well. I think that they're trying to force the woke on us, force men into women's sports. You know, a penis in every female locker room, that sounds great. Like, what's that about? They're not going to be happy until there's only men on the women's podium at the swimming event. Like, why? Like, that's a terrible idea. So if they're stuck on that stuff, I think I'm optimistic we're in good shape. But promises made, promises kept. So if he says he's going to do stuff, you know, I'm sure some of you are thinking about the Epstein stuff. If we're being told something's going to get released and it doesn't, that's not helpful. So we got to try to avoid those mistakes. And if we can do that, then I think we're going to have a real good shot, because the left just really, really is doing poorly right now.
Thank you very much.
We have time for one last question.
Hi, my name is Lydia Hernandez. I'm from Long Beach City College. I know during your speech, from what I understood, that you were mainly talking about keeping people accountable. I know you brought up Carol and her case with Trump with the supposed rape, but after all, he kind of was found guilty of sexual abuse, and with the defamation, she was awarded a huge amount of money. I'm just curious, like, how should we take that, just the verdict of it? I'm just kind of iffy on it, you know?
Yeah, he was not found guilty of sexual abuse. He's found liable for defamation, which is different. And the defamation was he basically attacked her for what he believed is falsely accusing her of the sexual abuse. So it's a very big distinction, and I'm glad you made it, because a lot of mainstream people, George Stephanopoulos basically said the same thing, and that's why he'd apologize to Trump and pay off Trump. So, and the point that you'll see in the book, I go through it, is that these cases are largely decided once the judge and jury are impaneled. I spoke to Trump personally about this exact case, and he said that he actually admitted he didn't think his legal team handled this one that well, and he calls out some names. I named them in the book. But he said it doesn't even matter. If he had OJ's attorneys, he said to me, it wouldn't have made a difference, because once the judge and jury were there, he was done. And so that is corruption. If you cannot get a fair trial in America's major city because you're a conservative politician, that is a disaster for this country. That deeply undermines law and order. And thank you. It's a terrific question, because it allows for me to clear up some common misconceptions that a lot of people have, I think, about some of these major cases. That is a huge, huge scandal that I think we're just beginning to understand. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is always a blast. I love Young America's Foundation. Have a great rest of your week. And I'll be signing books outside.